Redditors, who turned down a marriage proposal. How did it go, and why? I found out my ex was cheating on me and immediately broke it off with him. The next day he showed up on my doorstep in the snow crying. When I went outside he got on one knee and presented me with a heart-shaped ring. I went back inside and baked cookies. It was a greater decision as I met my current boyfriend a few years later and he makes me truly happy. I was 18 and found a job at a fish and chip shop to earn me some money before I left home for university. My family had been customers there all my life and it had recently been bought by an Indian gentleman who owned a few such takeaways and installed his 20-year-old nephew there as the manager. So on my second shift me and the nephew, Bobby, were just chatting during a lull and he asks if I have a boyfriend. As it happens I did, a long distance relationship with a guy in Germany. He asked why I hadn't married him. I gave the obvious reason that we lived in two different countries. Bobby seemed to think this was no big issue and we should get married anyway. I laughed it off. Then Bobby asked if I thought he could meet a wife here in England. Well sure I said, but how? He asked. Well you'll just have to go out and meet someone I said. Then he asked if I'd marry him. I laughed again, but he was being deadly serious. I told him I was happily committed to my boyfriend and wouldn't marry someone I barely knew anyway. 3 shifts later I was let go. No reason given. I went back to hand in my uniform on what would have been my shift and there was already another younger girl installed there. Caught her giving free food out to her friend and laughed. Whatever reason he had for replacing me, he was stuck with a dishonest thief for staff now. A few weeks pass, and just before I moved away to university my folks asked me to run out and get a chip shop dinner, so off I went. An older lady who worked there had known me since I was a baby and had gotten me the job. Looked harassed. Turned out she was covering for the new girl who had called in sick. Then she tells me this is the 3rd new girl they'd had since I was sacked. For some reason Bobby didn't like any of the girls they kept hiring. Guess none of them wanted to marry him either. Abusive ex-BF hit me up after 3 years of no contact. Out of the blue asked for a lunch date to talk. We met, had awkward small talk, and after, when I thought he was driving me home, he took me back to our old high school football stadium. We would hang there when we dated, and he got down on his knee and begged for me back, and then pulls out a ring and asks me to marry him as well. I apologized and politely declined. I'd had a miscarriage when we were together, and he was absolutely terrible to me during. He told me it obviously wasn't his because his seed would have been strong enough to survive, and I was lying. Every time I look at his face I hear those words. Not me, but my wife. While she was at BCT for the National Guard before we were married, but we had been dating about 5 years at that point, a guy with a very thick accent told her that he needed to speak to her father. Well, she has not had contact with her father since sometime early in high school. Hell, I've never met him, never planned to either, and she told this guy such. He then went on and said that he must speak to her father. Eventually it comes out that he wants to speak to her father about her dowry. Something about his father has many cattle and he could provide for her very well. I think she told him something about how that's not how things are done in the US. Her father had no say in who she married, and she was happily dating someone. Dude backed off and apparently was otherwise pleasant for the rest of the time there. Just a monstrous amount of culture shock. I still laugh about it every time I remember her telling me about it. We'd only been together for a few months, both military and stationed in Germany. I was about to deploy, and my contract ended pretty much as soon as I was set to return. She said we should get married so we could stay together when I got back. I'd already been divorced at this point and wasn't about to marry some girl I'd only been with a few months. So I told her we'd see how we held up with me deployed and cross that bridge when we came to it. About 2 months into my deployment she and a friend of mine eloped. I was hurt, but boy did I dodge a bullet. Also their marriage ended exactly how you'd expect, divorced in less than 6 months. She was f***ing a couple other guys on the side, and he was too stupid/naive to realize. Remember folks, if they'll cheat with you, they'll cheat on you. I was proposed to in 2013. He took me into the mountains with a leg picnic of fruit and cheese. We looked at the stars, and he brought a paper lantern to release. He didn't know you're supposed to do it over water, so it can 1 actually fly and 2 not land amongst the trees and start a forest fire. I had to tell him that it wouldn't work. Then he told me he wanted to spend his life with me and asked if I would marry him. I said no, because I was 17 and we were both fresh out of high school, and also I didn't even know he even had a crush on me. He told me that any 2 righteous people can be happy together with the blessing of the Lord, regardless of initial attraction. I said big no and called a friend to pick me up. Teenagers are f***ing crazy. He asked me in public, which he knew I hated the thought of. We had actually talked about wedding proposals a few weeks prior, and I had made it clear that I would never say yes to a proposal in public. He still felt it necessary to ask me at a concert of a band his friend was in. I said no. He didn't take it graciously, and I got a lot of hate from everyone who was literally around me. People were cussing me out for declining, without even knowing my name. I broke up with him shortly afterwards because he didn't stop whining about me embarrassing him so. We had only been dating for about a month. He was pretty obsessive at first, but I thought maybe it would just be a phase, so I blew it off. One day, he brought me to a jeweler's to get my ring size and I could pick out the ring. I also thought it was just a promise ring, no biggie. People do those kinda things early on as well. What got me was when he bought it, took me to a park, got down on one knee and said, "I love you baby." I knew I wanted to do this the moment we matched. Unfortunately on Tinder, you're the love of my life. Now I can show everyone that I own you. Will you marry me? He was gonna own me. Like a f***ing pet. I wanted to wring his neck for saying that. I don't get offended easily, but saying owned really pissed me off. I helped him up back to his feet though, and we walked back to his car that he was currently living in, right down the street from my condo, so he could keep an eye on me, and I told him I wasn't going to marry him, and that I thought it was best we should break up and move on. I didn't feel comfortable having him drive me home, so I took an Uber after that. Unfortunately, still being the obsessive guy he was, he tried with the coming to my condo every day with gifts and crying and just trying to make me feel bad and get back together. Then it got to him getting angry and threats. After about a month, he gave up, and I haven't seen him since. It's been a year now. Thank God. My mom turned down my dad's original proposal. My parents had been dating for roughly 3 months when they got pregnant with me. They had moved in together, and things had been going well. My mom was making dinner and my dad was on his knees fixing the kitchen door, and out of nowhere he asks her to marry him. She thinks he's kidding, and tells him he can't be serious. His exact line was, "Well, I'm already on my knees." He had married before, but had been separated from his ex-wife for a number of years, but they were still technically married. So my mom told him he needed to get that figured out and propose in not such a dopey way. Not me, but some poor soul at my local bowling alley. We were rolling rocks on a Friday night. The bowling alley was happening. The tune stopped, and the guy on the intercom asked if we could all direct our attention to lane 16. A guy dropped to his knee and asked his lady friend to marry him. She said no. She looked embarrassed and stormed out. He took a swig of his beer and rolled a ball down the lane. I'd like to think he thought the music would come back on and everyone would go about their business. Nope. Everyone was shocked and just watched him bowl like 4 times before the music came back on, and he finally just sat down. Felt like an eternity of cringe. Boyfriend of 2 years at the time. I was 18 and visiting him while he was stationed in another state. I thought he was joking when he told me we could go to the courthouse and get it done. When I laughed and said no, he tried pitching all the benefits we would get. When I said no again, he stormed out angrily and called me later drunk, telling me I was a bitch for rejecting his marriage proposal. I broke up with him soon afterwards. A beautiful woman who I loved with all of my heart, and I still think about her almost every day. She asked me to marry her, but I was afraid, and I said no. I still hear the way her voice broke when the word left my lips. It's my biggest regret in life. My whole life past my early 20s would be wildly different, and probably for the better. I live each day with the choice I made. She's married now to a really great guy. They have 2 children and I talk to her once every several years. I'm in my mid-late 30s, single, never married, with a beautiful dog. I know my life isn't over, and in a lot of ways I'm in a really good place. That memory never goes away though. I know I made the wrong choice. Guess I get to be the lone male story. Was dating a girl in college. Had been together maybe 8 months, during which we'd broken up for a brief period. She had a penchant for drama, and seemed like she expected her life to go like a rom-com. Sex was great though, so I figured it'd be fun to let things run their course. We were sitting on the patio, and she was in my lap, and asked me to marry her. I chuckled because I assumed she was joking. We hadn't talked about marriage at all, hadn't had any of the serious conversations about children, finances, goals and aspirations, nothing. So I said, half laughing, that I didn't think we were in a great position to be considering marriage and that it probably wasn't the best idea. She starts doing that stoic crying business where she's weeping, but maintaining eye contact, like we're in the goddamn Notebook or some shit. We broke up for good not long after. She married some rich guy who is apparently content to deal with her crazy in exchange for $96, and I married someone much more well adjusted, so I guess things worked out for both of us in the end.